Thank you. On Saturday, in the Daily Telegraph, Linton Crosby, the mastermind of the Tory campaign, wrote a long piece about how he knew how the Tories were going to win an outright majority from the off. Let me just say that Linton Crosby is the only man who knew that, with the possible exception, it now turns out today, of Mick Jagger. On the election night, as sketch writer, I was sent off to the what's called the ITV opinion room, where they get a whole load of, it's basically where people talk bullshit and fill up the hours until we actually know what's going to happen. And 10 minutes before the exit poll came out, I was talking to Danny Finkelstein, who is one of Cameron's right-hand men. And I said, Danny, what's happening? What do you think? And he said, John, I think it's worse than we thought. We thought 285. We're looking now more like 275. Come the exit poll, my first instinct is, was he messing with me? So I sort of went straight back and said, Danny, were you messing with me? Were you gaming? Because this is predicting 318. And he said, no, never believe an exit poll. I won't believe it till I see it. So Danny Finkelstein had no idea, and I can assure you that nobody had any idea. But one of the joys of having become the Parliamentary, it's a great honour to be a Parliamentary sketch writer. I follow in the footsteps of great men like Simon Hogarth. And it's one of the few jobs that are equal opportunities. My job is to satirise and make fun of politicians of every description and every party. But they never let you down. Or very rarely. During the election, while Parliament was, they were off campaigning, I was chasing around sort of various events, and every day you'd have to kind of work out where the fun was. And one day, I just had this hunch that the most fun would be to be had at a policy briefing from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And it turned out to be the best event by far, and illuminating. For those that don't, the IFS is an independent think tank. When it turns out figures the Tories don't like, the Tories rubbish it, and when it turns out figures Labour don't like, Labour rubbish it. So it must be doing sort of something right. And I knew it was getting better when it was held down in a basement, because these were proper economists who can't bear light, the natural daylight. And we started off with a bloke called Carl, who was the chief economist. And he said, I've worked with some imaginary numbers. They were costing everybody's manifesto. I've worked with some imaginary numbers before, but these are imaginary numbers. They are just so far off the scale. The Tories, it turned out, were, more off the scale than anybody else in the terms of what they're promising and how they can deliver it. It also turned out that the SNP would actually end up delivering more austerity than Labour by 2019, which was a bit of a turn-up for the books. But then they felt the need, they felt they were losing their... It was predominantly the right-wing media that was in there, who had come for a good news story, and they weren't really kind of getting it. So they sent a rather nice woman called, I can't remember, Tina, I think she was. She was much smilier than Carl anyway. And she basically said, it was like every political party had written their manifesto, and they were part of a remedial economics GCSE class, and that it was her job to inform their parents that it would be probably best if they didn't take the exams in May. And so, I mean, but these, of course, I mean, here we get to the sort of the nub of it, and these were manifestos that were never designed to actually be fulfilled. They were all bargaining chips in what everyone assumed was going to be a coalition, and so they were sort of wrangling points, and the nervousness within every party was extraordinary as the election went on, and the polls, I mean, we see now they got it wrong, but the polls just didn't seem to move for 6 weeks. And, you know, they tried everything. I mean, one of my great days with David Cameron was sort of the day after Dave had been given permission or instructions to be pumped up and to show passion. And Dave's way of doing this is to roll up his sleeves and then have them ironed. That is the heartland of passion. And sort of Dave trying to be really kind of hardcore and, you know, get you going, it just sort of doesn't work. And especially as all these events are stage managed for sort of about 30 party activists. And so that it looks that you're in a sort of aircraft hangar or a factory somewhere. And there are only about 35 people there who are all going, yeah, because they've been sort of bribed to, basically. And the TV cameras have been set up to make it look like the room's full. And then you've also got to remember the people that they don't want you to see. I mean, Osborne and Gove are the kiss of death, and they just don't attract people, so they were never let anywhere near any public events. And the other one, of course, who is never allowed anywhere near anything these days is Grant Shapps, who is known as sort of Michael Green. He's got various aliases. And during the middle of the campaign, he'd been accused of altering people's Wikipedia entry. So I thought it would be great to have a day out searching for Grant. So I emailed his office 3 times and kept getting fobbed off. Nobody knew. I emailed central office, and I knew he had hustings in his constituency on that Wednesday. So I went up to Hatfield and got kicked out of his constituency office, and eventually turned up, and he didn't turn up at all. And then he contacts me on Twitter later and said, "John, why didn't you try and get in contact with me?" And I said, "I did, Grant." And he said, "Please, look, I can show you kind of conversations. I always said I wasn't going. What email shall I send it to?" And I said, "Well, send it to the email that you didn't answer last time," and which he did, eventually. And then we had the sort of the Lib Dems, who, one of my great mysteries for me was Nick Clegg, because he looked the most relaxed person of the lot. He wandered around in this kind of Zen-like state. And I couldn't work out a man whose party was looking catastrophic in the polls. I mean, it got worse than he imagined, but I kind of wanted to know why. And the first time I went to go and see them, they had a sort of bus, a battle bus, which all the journalists on it called Plucky, for the plucky Lib Dems, as they like to call themselves. And Nick Clegg, I mean, the thing about the Lib Dems is they could not organise a piss-up in a brewery. I mean, apologies and all that. But the first time I went down to Eastleigh, and they didn't realise that I was a journalist, so I was first of all herded off with an SDP activist to be told how to hold up the future sort of Lib Dems. Don't all hold them up at once because you can't clap. Then if you all hold them up. And there was another time when he went off to go and cook a curry, in Cardiff. Now I can assure you, if this had been sort of Cameron or Miliband, it would have been well organised, wouldn't have got anywhere near it. But I went down with Anne Treneman of The Times, who's a sort of wonderful sketch writer and a great friend, and because he was doing this kind of curry thing, and his minders hadn't actually, I mean, he'd gone off and gone to make a speech, and he just left the food. So Anne Treneman turned the event into MasterChef by marking his food, and you would just never get away with that. The Greens, how are we doing? Yep. Well, I kind of think the great tragedy there was that Caroline Lucas had to spend all her time at Brighton Pavilion, sort of winning back her seat. It wasn't cast iron. So that sort of left Natalie Bennett in charge. And although she got better, she never really kind of captured the imagination after her brain fade. And in fact, I went to their spring conference in Liverpool, and it was sort of, they touchingly gave her a standing ovation before she started talking. And it was clearly in case they couldn't give her one at the end. I mean, there was a sort of kind of tragedy to that. UKIP have ended up with one MP. I mean, Carswell isn't even UKIP. He thinks he's a Gladstonian liberal, which would shock Farage and every other member of UKIP. Farage resigned on a Friday and then came back on Monday. Most of us call that a weekend, you know, but no, that's apparently a resignation. And then we get to Labour. I mean, in many ways, the Tories gamed it very badly because they'd given Ed such a bad press and told everybody he's stupid, he's an idiot, so that when he did actually string two sentences together, you know, people actually thought, wow, this isn't too bad. And then the Mail sort of backfired because they did a thing about how he had had lovers before, you know. And suddenly that sort of backfired because suddenly people thought, Ed's had lovers. and this sort of came out on the day that he launched the Labour manifesto in Swindon. And there was a swagger about Ed then. Yeah, bring it on. And he started taking questions from all sorts of journalists he'd never had before. Yeah, probably shagged your bird. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, fantastic. But then every time, you know, the trouble with Ed is that the bar, you know, he can just sort of still, however low you set it, he can just crash through it. And with the Ed Stone, he did. But I just want to, this is something, some of you may remember the Labour Party conference last September, when the famous speech where he forgot to mention the deficit. I mean, this is what we have been spared, because in amongst all the stuff about missing the deficit, people forgot what he actually did have to say. Now, here's the thing, friends. The other day, I visited an A&E department, and I met a guy called Colin. And you know what Colin said to me? He said, I love the NHS. And so do I. Sadly, Colin died. That's true. I mean, Ed Miliband kills satire. You know what happened then? Well, let me tell you what happened then. I went to a college where I met an apprentice. Her name was Elizabeth. And Elizabeth is here today. Where are you, Elizabeth? Stand up, please, Elizabeth. Everyone, give Elizabeth a round of applause for being an apprentice. Under Labour, we will have many more apprentices, like Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. You can sit down now. Let me tell you something else, friends. The other day I was out walking in the park, Primrose Hill, you know. I was trying to think about what I was going to say in this speech, actually. Now here's the thing. I met two women, Beatrice and Helen. They were actually hoping to meet Benedict Cumberbatch. Anyway, I got chatting to Beatrice and Helen. And you know what they said to me? This is what they said. They said, this Tory government is making it hard for us to complete our doctorates on Victorian women's bodies in art. And that's not the kind of country I want. The kind of country I want is one where Beatrice and Helen can complete their doctorates together. Because they are better together. We are better together. Which is why I'm going to increase the minimum wage. Now, here's the thing, friends. I also met a guy on Hampstead Heath. A lovely guy called Gareth. And Gareth said to me, Britain is broken. And I said, I hear you, Gareth. So, friends, I make this pledge to you. With your help, I am going to mend Britain. Together we can. Together we are better. Better we are together.